So my question, General Ryan, is what does it tell us about Russia's military strategy and capacity that its offensive is moving slower than many historical campaigns, even slower than World War I offensives?
Well, I think there's a range of factors that are contributing to this. Firstly, winter is contributing to this, although, to be fair, winter both helps and hinders those trying to go on the offensive because it can shelter the movement of Russians with fog and things like that. But overall, winter has a negative impact on mobility. Second, the Ukrainian armed forces have continued to improve their capability to use drones to interdict Russian forces and kill Russians. About 80% of all casualties now are inflicted through drones. Another contributor is that the Russians are trying to advance on multiple fronts at the moment in the northeast, around Kharkiv, around Sumy and Liman, and also in the south. So they're spreading their efforts rather than concentrating them like they were about 18 months ago. That's also having an impact. The real thing I hope that will occur this year is what the new Defence Minister has said he would like to do is to significantly increase the number of Russians each month that are casualties, which will hopefully change Putin's calculus about peace negotiations and ending the war.
But also, General Ryan, you argue that Putin cannot afford peace, despite the fact of negotiation. So is this war no longer just about Ukraine, but about the survival of Putin's regime?
This war has become about the survival of Russia now. Putin has made it that way. He has miscalculated constantly throughout this war. He miscalculated the tremendous resolve and courage of the Ukrainian people and the capacity of NATO and Europe now to support Ukraine. Because he has squandered so many resources on this war for essentially very little return, certainly not what he promised the Russian people, he can't bring home an army that has lost a war. He knows from Russian history that when that happens, political strife can occur and indeed even regime change. So he has to continue with this war to deliver some kind of win to the Russian people. He can't do that at the moment. It's not looking like he'll be able to do that in the short term either.
But is there a point where even an authoritarian regime and system starts to crack under the weight of returning veterans and mounting losses and economic exhaustion? What could be the real trigger?
Well, there is, I think. There's an old saying, no tree grows to the sky. Russia's resources are not infinite, but it hasn't reached that breaking point just yet. Clearly, there is a massive increase in crime committed by veterans in Russia. Clearly, there are significant pressures on the Russian economy. But at the end of the day, modern authoritarian regimes have far more tools to suppress people, to suppress gatherings, and use technology to surveil people. Putin, unfortunately, probably has some longevity left in his regime just yet.
In General Ryan, in one of your regular updates on war and negotiation process, you argue and you suggest that Kremlin is focusing its pressure on Washington, hoping the U.S. will push Kyiv into an unfavorable ceasefire. How vulnerable is the American political system to that kind of external pressure?
Well, unfortunately, I think the American political system is more vulnerable to pressure from the Russians than the Ukrainian military is to pressure from the Russian military. The Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian people have proved themselves to be extraordinarily resilient to both military, political, aerial bombing and these kind of things. Unfortunately, the current US administration has proven to be very willing to work with Putin and his regime to give Putin some of the things that he wants from this war, none of which he should get. So Putin is working with the Trump administration and the representatives of that administration to give him what he can't win on the battlefield in Ukraine.
So in this case, can the White House realistically lean on Ukraine to accept a deal that may be unstable but politically convenient for Moscow? And if so, who does that kind of a deal really serve?
Well, I think it believes it can. It can withdraw intelligence. It can withdraw the sale of weapons that Europeans are purchasing to give to Ukraine. Now, whether that would be popular with Trump's MAGA base, because even they don't like Russia tremendously much, and support for Ukraine has continued to remain high among the American public. So I think Trump believes he can pressure Ukraine, but I'm not sure the people of Ukraine and the government of Ukraine and the military of Ukraine would stand for the kind of pressure that would see them give away territory in Ukraine that Russia hasn't had to fight for, that puts Russia in a better position to recommence this war in several years' time.
Yeah. And you also described a potential ceasefire as a temporary pause rather than a peace. So is a pause sometimes more dangerous than continuing the war? Because a lot of analysts in Ukraine saying the pause will be not in favor of Ukraine.
No, I think the analysts in Ukraine are right. They understand Russia better than anyone in Washington, D.C. does, and they know that whilst the people of Ukraine desire peace more than anyone on earth, that Russia desires to subjugate Ukraine more than anyone on earth. And any peace deal, any ceasefire is very likely to be broken by Putin and the Russians, just as they've broken every peace deal of the 20th century that they've been a party to.
Are there other historical examples where a frozen conflict actually led to a lasting peace rather than just simply setting the stage for the next war?
Some might offer that Korea is an example, but there was no peace agreement. It's just an armistice. Both sides agreed to not fight each other any longer. I'm not sure that provides a very good example because the context, the culture, a whole range of things are very different. Unfortunately, history shows us that even where there are temporary peaces, these things tend to want to sort themselves out, the momentum of history, the momentum of people, just as between World War I and World War II, we saw that eventually the Germans in that conflict, or the Japanese, wanted to resolve long-standing issues, and that's how the Russians, I think, will behave after a peace deal.
Yeah, speaking about modern Germans, Germany's defense minister, Boris Pistorius, says that for Europe, stopping support for Ukraine would ultimately cost far more than continuing it. From your perspective, what is the real price Europe would pay in security, in stability, in political influence if Ukraine were left to face Russia alone?
Well, the worst that could happen is Russia could slowly take over all of Ukraine. Now, I think the Ukrainian people and the military would have a lot to say about that. But you might also see Russia decide if it can't win in Ukraine, it wants to get a win somewhere else, like the Baltic states or in Scandinavia. You're also seeing Russia emboldened enough to undertake sabotage and subversion throughout Europe over the last couple of years. So Europe is fighting this war on a whole range of fronts. Even though it doesn't have boots on the ground in Ukraine, it is doing a lot to try and deter Russia. The challenge, however, is it will have to do a lot more for Ukraine to win and for Europe to deter Russia from further military aggression.